All right. Well, great. Hey, good morning, y'all. Appreciate it. Great to be here. This is actually my second time in front of this group. I was here last year, and I guess they said, well, let's do a redo. You know, let's see if this guy can do a little better this time. So we'll see how it happens. I really love this opportunity to talk to you all. I love the opportunity to be in Chicago. Actually, when I first started this career journey, it was across the lake when I was living in Benton Harbor, Michigan. And I was working with Whirlpool, and I'll talk about that in a second. But every time I come back here, it feels like home in so many ways. And it's great to have Kathy and be her partner, and, you know, and just be kind of the southern version of that. We're going to go through some information pretty quickly. Then we'll have some chance for Q&A here at the end. My intent really is to give you hopefully a couple of insights, maybe a couple of tools, and a direction of where to go next if you find it useful and helpful. And that's really my whole intent here today. But let me give you the quick commercial that Kathy already gave as far as setting context around CMP. We do power the full talent life cycle. All the issues around hiring, development, engaging, assessing, and ultimately if you have to transition or go through a transition process, we support the full talent life cycle. We are fundamentally organized around 3 groups. We help predict fit. So getting talent right at the front end. If I had $10 to spend on human resources, I'd spend 7 of it on just getting the talent right. Getting the talent right is so absolutely critical. We have a lot of very deep analytical tools to actually assess people, so you know, the company knows what the fit looks like. The hit rate goes up tremendously when we bring that in. So we predict fit. And we also will take over searches at that point if necessary. And we do a lot of that too in the predict fit. We develop for performance, highly analytical, numbers driven. Love finance groups like this because we do things like measure the drag coefficient, the financial impact of ineffective team decision making. We had one client where we measured that, and it was $233 million a year, where the top team decision making had that much financial impact or drag coefficient on the bottom line due to ineffective, lack of totally homogenous, untimely decision making. So we love the analytics of the talent space. So that's a big part of what we do in that middle piece, develop performance in measurable, meaningful ways through coaching, teamwork, assessment. And then finally, when there is transition, we help people find their next. So that's really given us an interesting vantage point on the market. We're one of the few firms that is on both sides of that equation, right? We're hiring people and we're helping people who are in transition at the end of an organization life onto their next. So we're really at that search transition kind of vortex. And so as a result, we're constantly seeing what's going on in the market. What are the clients, companies asking for when it comes to new talent? And what are we seeing as far as our outplacement candidates? What are they looking for? And there's so many trends I've seen, honestly, in the years I've been in this. Some of the things I've seen in the last 4 or 5 years are real interesting. One is nobody retires anymore. Nobody does it. This whole notion of I'm going to go off and play golf or be in my yacht or whatever, nobody does. They do that, but everyone wants to go into some form of more flexibility, freedom, joy, but I want to keep a toe in it because I want to stay engaged, or maybe I have to from an income stream standpoint or what. So nobody fully retires anymore. A number of other trends that we're seeing, and I'll go through them real quick, that we see as we're in the market every day. One is, you don't see people, going to necessarily a full-time job anymore, right? That whole idea of, okay, I clock out here, and a month, 3, 5, 6 months later, I clock in there, full-time job. We see an emergence of a lot of fractional leadership roles, ton of those. I'd say probably 20% of the executives that we've worked outplacement with in the last 2 years have gone to a fractional role or set of fractional roles, which is interesting. It's also often part of the retirement mix that people do. We've also seen purposeful career pauses. It used to be death. You were just coached not to do that, right? You got to show continuity in your, in the chronology, et cetera. People are taking meaningful pauses in their career to stay at home or do something interesting. We had one just last week where he went off to a mission trip for 5 months in Africa, right? Came back, now he's back in. You used to not coach people to do that, but what we find is the story's okay now. You can take purposeful, and actually in some ways, and for some companies, it's seen as a positive. We've also seen rent-to-own contracts. We counsel people to do that, even our clients. How do you know you like each other? Why don't you do 3 months and feel it out and go from there. So a lot of times there's a half step before the full step of full employment. We see that as a trend. We see virtual roles and global reach. We see definitely a diminishing of global jobs, but an increase in global assignments. So people saying, we want you, but you don't have to move here, right? So this whole idea of embracing a virtual setup, even for senior leadership roles, is very interesting. We've seen that. Melding family and business, more and more we see that. That's, by the way, wrought with some really good opportunities and potential issues, as I think you're aware. Entrepreneurial franchise startup, we see more and more of that. People looking for that, even if they've got a role, executives doing these franchise things on the side to create second and third incomes and revenue streams just for their own portfolio of revenue stream. A lot of consulting and opportunistic niche, and then pro-retirement. Just some of what we see out there in the market. So I know as you're in there transitioning, I don't know what you see. Be interesting. Maybe we can compare notes if you have a few minutes after. We'll have those chats. But that's some of the kind of trends we see. And if you're not bumping into a full-time role, but you're bumping into this, it's not you, it's them. That's the market. That's what's going on right now. And it's totally okay. You just got to figure out what works for you, and I think embrace what is a very different gig economy and new world, if that makes sense. So what we always tell executives in transition is stay open, explore, be open-minded. When you stitch together your next, it might look quite a bit different than your previous. And I know from my experience, my last real job was the head of human resources at Tenet Healthcare. I don't know if you've ever heard of Tenet. They're a large, publicly traded healthcare system. And fundamentally, who knew, right? That 18 years later, I'd be doing this sort of thing. So I know from personal experience and just what we see in the market, that's where the world's going. So let's jump into kind of the major content of today. It is about making it work, specifically not dreading Monday, specifically making your career really everything it can be. And this really came as an area of passion of mine. Again, it was about 20 years ago. I was living across the lake working with Whirlpool Corporation. And it seemed like everywhere I went, my friend who was Bill Garjoul, a colleague of mine, and myself, everywhere we went, anyone we talked to would tell us how much they hated their job. I mean, it was like everywhere we went. I'd be standing in line at the movie. How you doing, Joe? Great. I don't like my job. I don't like my boss. I mean, okay. We're getting ice cream, talking to family, friends. It seems like that it would always default to this discussion of their job and how much they did not like it. And I remember sharing that with Bill Gargiulo because he was having the same experience. And we said, is this just anecdotal? Is this something we're bumping into? Or is this a real phenomenon, systemic phenomenon? So we made it a point of study. And we decided to go do some research. And we ended up doing about 2.5 years of research to really figure out this whole thing called careers. Our real simple logic was, it's where the majority of our waking hours are spent. And so if your career isn't working, at some level your life's not working. Because, that's where the majority of your time is spent. So what's going on? Is it a pervasive issue? If it is a pervasive issue, is there anything we can do about it? And so we have a passion in helping people build great careers and helping organizations maximize engagement. It's one of the very simple things. If the career works, it's good for the individual, it's good for the company. And what we found in our research was kind of telling. What we found is that the majority of folks are in the midst of a mediocre career. And we're going to, and the relatively few that are really loving their career do things that are very, very different than everybody else. And so we're going to share some of those things. So we'll get to that in a sec, but what we found also is that at the core of knowing and finding and shaping a fantastic career, and we'll share some of those principles in a sec, is knowing yourself. You've got to know yourself in specific ways. I'm not saying lay on the couch and have a psychiatrist talk about your 3-year-old experiences, although maybe you want to do that, that's fine. But there's specific things you need to know about yourself. And it really is, and I love these quotes. Man stands his own shadow and wonders why it's dark, right? The wisest people follow their own direction. Fundamentally, you got to find out who you are and then carve your own career. And then you avoid a lot of the pitfalls that most of us fall into because we default to whatever anyone tells us it should be or the company needs from us. All right? So as part of that whole idea of you knowing yourself, you've got a little assessment, 1-pager in front of you. And it looks like, I'll borrow yours real quick, Career Success Indicator. So the front side are a series of 25 questions. If you could go ahead and use a pen, obviously, and answer each of those 25 questions. They're all paired responses. So each one of those, you circle 0, 1, or 2, depending upon which one is true or if they're both true. So you all have a number. You all have a number. I won't ask for hands. I've done that in large groups where it's more anonymous, but you guys might, I don't want to pollute the data or make you out you. By the way, I am Canadian, so if you hear the out thing going on, I might as well say that now, because inevitably I'm halfway through the presentation, someone will hear the out and about, and then they'll interrupt everything to process the fact that I'm Canadian. So I think I'm the only guy that says, how y'all doing, eh? With the Texas kind of Canadian thing showing up.
Plural of A.
Eh? Well, that's a deep question. I don't even know how to answer that. Only in Chicago. You guys are smart. I don't know what the plural. A's, You've all got a number. Now, if you haven't probably guessed, the higher the number, the better. The higher number really shows that you have some level of engagement, satisfaction, career satisfaction within your current or last job. Highest number you can get is 50. The lowest number you can get is 0, right? It doesn't go negative. So, very general rules of thumb. As you complete this, just kind of a current snapshot of who you are. If you're 41 to 50, you are or were, depending on kind of context of job or previous job, generally totally passionate about the work you're doing. Now, it's interesting. You look at those questions. They kind of a myriad of things, right? Physical health, sense of well-being, some of the things that seem more obviously connected to career than others. Those questions and that assessment is a validated assessment that was refined over a number of years and over thousands of people who completed it. And what we found is that those were, in our research, the biggest predictors of identifying whether you're engaged in your career or not. And some of the biggest predictors in our item analysis were the physical effects of it. People physically felt better when they were doing what they enjoyed most every day. They physically felt worse and had less resilience, immune system was down, etc., when they didn't like what they were doing. So some of the things about how healthy you feel, etc., were absolutely predictive from a content validity standpoint with your career. It really, really mattered. So if you're at 41 to 50, that's a good place to be, right? Then 21 to 40 means some days are better than others, right? You have some level of mediocrity. Some days you're pretty jazzed, some weeks, some months, maybe some years in your job, other years not so much. If you're below 20, we have a problem, right? You fundamentally are in a job that's not working for you, or we're in a job that wasn't working for you. So transition is good because it is affecting you psychologically, like your physical aspects and every other aspect. Now, again, we've done this with thousands of people. What do you think the distribution is? What percentage of folks, from a breakout standpoint, do you think are 41 to 50? 10%? I heard 15%. Any other two? 7%? You guys are smart. I tell you what. 9%. 9% of folks in our distribution are 41 to 50, right? Now, that was troubling. That still pretends to be troubling to me. And certainly was troubling when we were running this data and saw this trend and saw it as meta across age groups, cross functions, cross levels. Didn't matter if you're an executive or frontline person. These were pretty consistent. There's a little bit of variance, a little bit of a positive and negative skew depending on your tenure and level in the organization, but not too significant difference. This was pretty consistent across all demographics. Now, what was more concerning is when we done pre-test and post-test. So we'd assess people, and then we say, how reliable is this data? And then we'd have them do it again. And so that 9% is a fluid number. What I mean by that is somebody's loving it now. They're at 44. You test them a year from now, and they're at 31 or 28 because the boss has changed, roles changed, something's changed fundamentally in the organization. So when we looked at what percentage of folks actually stay there or actually above 41 on a consistent year-over-year basis, it's 3%. 3% of people have a consistently great career love it. It's affecting them in all these positive ways year over year. 3% of us. I think it's the underreported issue of our day. I really do. That careers just aren't working for so many people in a way that really affects their personal, professional life. So what did we learn? Some of the fundamental things I've touched on already. When we looked at this whole thing of careers through our study and work, it's obviously where the biggest part of our productive lives are spent. It's used to define who we are. If I meet you at a party, I'm going to ask, who are you? I'm a CFO. I'm a finance professional. I'm in whatever industry. Our work defines us. It has a huge impact on our overall sense of well-being. And it impacts everything else, health, relationships. When we do assessments of executives for selection, one of the things in a couple of our batteries, if we use them, we look at is your sense of self-efficacy, your sense of self-esteem. And I know if someone's in transition because it's low. It's low. And I know that if they're not in transition because it is consistently much, much higher. It affects us when we don't have a job. It affects us when we don't have that identity and we don't have a place to go, we don't have that meeting. Perhaps that's why people don't retire anymore. Work matters. Matters tremendously. Now, how do you make it work? What we went off and did is said, okay, well, that 3%, what do they do different than everyone else? How do they make it work? And that ended up being our first book, Make It Work, right? But how do they make it work? And what we learned was very, very interesting. One is they have a set of beliefs that are different and counter to much of the toxic career advice we've been given. And they have certain practices. And I'm going to touch on those pretty quickly. And then certainly if you want to learn more, you can take the book. All right. So why are people experiencing mediocre careers? Much of the pervasive career myths, much of what you've told isn't true when it comes to shaping a career. That's what we've learned. And beliefs drive behaviors, which drive ultimately results. Second, misalignment with passions. At the end of the day, you've got to do something that you love to do, right? And how do you fundamentally get that done? Most organizations are not in the business of trying to align with your passions. They're in the business of getting work done. Top of the list, Kathy and I lead a business, and we got to remember to ask what do you love to do, right? Because I know what I want them to do, but how do we meld that up strategically? Organizations aren't in the business of doing that. We have been institutionalized. We at 4 years old, we go to kindergarten through 12 years of formal education, then off to college and maybe an MBA. We spent all our time being taught to sit in, do what you're told in the box. And if you operate within that box, ultimately you'll be successful. What we found is sometimes you have to operate out of that box for it to work with you from a career standpoint. So here are the 16 pervasive career myths. I'm not going to make you read all those or digest all those, but there's 16 of them that we found are pervasive that really lead to, I think, bad results from a belief and behavior standpoint. But fortunately, there are some corresponding truths. When we worked with our 3%, interviewed them, shadowed them, talked to them, we found that they universally somehow embraced the truths on the right side. No one taught them to do it. Maybe they had a Dutch uncle, maybe they had a really smart grandpa or something, but somehow they learned what most of us didn't learn on the right side as far as how you really navigate a career. I'm going to highlight a few of these. One of the first career myths, and I hear this from executives all the time, and I wish this was true. To get ahead, you just need to do a good job. I wish that was true. I really, really do. I mean, fundamentally, life would be fair if that was true, but it's not. There's this whole milieu of politics that are absolutely inevitable, will absolutely matter. Even when, like Kathy and I, you run a firm, hey, we have clients, and we have others. People fundamentally are what organizations are. You have to be able to understand and navigate and accept that there's subjective elements of the world, and certainly the world you have to navigate. So the real question is, how do you navigate politics without being a political animal, right? That's the real question, not trying to avoid the fact that it's not just about performance. Second, now this is a myth, and let me explain this one. It's about work-life balance. Now, don't get me wrong. I got 5 kids, and so I had to go to work to escape sometimes. I love them to death, and I'm just joking. They're true. I want to spend time with them. Of course, you want to have a life outside of work. The problem you run into is there's a crusty definition in years past around what work-life balance meant. It usually meant something like you work 45, 43, whatever acceptable number of hours a week, and then you go on to your life. as if work and life were two different things. Check one, then check the other. What we found that these 3% weren't so worried about that. They were like, I need to first of all find my life's work. Then I have a lot more energy for everything else. And so maybe I work 55, 60 hours a week, but I got so much energy, I sleep, I don't need as much sleep, I have more energy, I'm more positive with my family, they're getting the best of me. So yeah, you got to balance, in a sense, your life fully. But the old crusty definition of certain number of hours, as if you're punching a clock versus doing what you love and then getting on with your life, was a really bad definition. Next one is a company will take care of you. I think we all know that. We say that, but we don't operate this way. I don't know how many executives I've talked to. They haven't networked in 20 years. Right? They haven't kept the people close. Why? Because fundamentally we know, hey, I got to take care of myself, but we didn't. We didn't operate under that knowledge. We really didn't know that ultimately the company will take care of itself, and you got to take care of yourself. And that 3%, when we work with them, they knew this. They knew this loud and clear. All right? So you're your own company. You got to take care of yourself, and that means investing week in, week out, when you're employed, all the other aspects of you and your brand. Okay, so the next one is company decisions are made rationally. That's a misnomer. And you know what? They never will be. They never will be. And when people are able to let go of that, it's a real liberating experience. There's really three elements that every decision is made in an organization: the rational, the emotional, and the political. Rational, emotional, political. And understanding that and being able to navigate that is everything as far as understanding your career and shaping the role and the type of work that you want to do. So both rational and non-rational thinking are always present, and by the way, they're necessary. Career paths are predictable. No, they're not. Not for most of us. It's interesting. We were in front of Christus Health. They're a large, not-for-profit healthcare system, about 55,000 employees across 13 states, and then they're in Latin America too. Great organization. We're in front of a number of professionals, all in their 50s and 60s. It's about 28 of them. This is just a few weeks ago. And I asked them the question, how many of you are doing something you knew even existed when you were in college? Nobody put their hand up. They're all doing something that they did not know existed when they were in college. Fundamentally, it's about career improvisation, not about some sort of predictable path. I started at Anderson Consulting, which became Accenture. We had that 2 years. I did that, and it was great. But that was the exception. And even there, it's kind of, the model has changed, right? And when we talk to and interview the CEOs, and we just did 3 for our new newsletter, we always talk about, how'd you get here? And it was never a straight shot. It was never a predictable path. It was improvisation, opportunistic stuff within a broad framework of what they love to do. And ultimately, they all had a mentor or two. That was always the common aspect of this. So career paths are not predictable. So there may or may not be a traditional career path. And right now, that's why I started with this. Maybe it's fractional roles. It could be a lot of different things. So make sure you're opening up the aperture as far as what that could look like for you. This last one, the myth. Find a job doing what you're good at. Well, that sounds dumb, right? Of course you want to do what you're good at. What we found with the 3%, that wasn't the motivating thing. You could be really good at stuff you don't enjoy doing. I mean, I did that early in my career. I was at Anderson Consulting. I'm called a consultant. That's a loose term. I'm 24 years old. I don't know how much I'm consulting around, really, honestly. And I remember, ultimately, I was the PowerPoint guy, right? I do presentations and give it to the partner. And I did really good. I was motivated. This is kind of fun, my first real job. And I remember having my career counseling session. We were saying, well, we love what you do around presentations, so we want you to keep doing that. We want you to keep doing that, because it makes us look good, and, we're going to pay you real well, we're going to promote you so you can be over. And that was like, as a nightmare for me, right? I'm good at it. I could have just kept doing it because people wanted it. It's not what you want to do. You got to do what you love doing. And that may or may not be what people tell you you're good at. And that, again, is what we learned from the 3%. So, foundational beliefs. Organizations, if you find yourself in, are much more malleable than we know. Yeah, a lot of times we think it's a bunch of rigid boxes where you just got to fit in. They will organize around people who have ideas, who are decisive, who are passionate about things, and they can see the connection. And it is about passion. I think that's what Steve Jobs, among other things, really left us. So here's the model. And this model is something that we found to be, and again, you can read more in our book. It really is a two-stage one that we walk people through who are really trying to figure out their career and take advantage and leverage the skills and the practices and beliefs of that kind of top 3%. It starts with the foundation, knowing yourself, right? And fundamentally, what do you love to do? But it's not as simple as that. And we're going to talk about how you really get to the career needs below that here in a second. And then the second piece is about then navigating the organizations you find yourself in. And we found that there's 6 practices as far as career navigation that are absolutely critical. What I want to do is spend a few minutes on going in that internal part, the career foundation, going through a quick exercise with you. So to that end, if you could take a piece of paper.
So there's paper at the end of the table. Just pass it down. Thank you.
Yeah, and take one piece of paper, eh?
So if you want to demo the board.
Yeah, absolutely. So does everyone have paper? Okay, here's what I want you to do. Fold it in half, like so, and then fold it in half again, like so. I learned this from my wife, who was a school teacher, and I guess did this regularly. So what you've just done is folded it twice, and then if you open up the piece of paper again, you have fairly even 4 boxes. That's all. We want you to operate in those 4 boxes. So if you can do the 2 folds and then open it up, you'll have completed the first assignment. So there it is. If you do that 4 parts. Yeah, see? Do you have a passion for it, though? That's the thing. All right. So we're gonna do a little bit of work around the foundation. It gives you a taste of it, eh? But if you want more, we'll talk. You can take the book, and it's free, by the way. And we're going to raffle some, and so all that stuff. But this whole simple question: what do you love to do? We'd ask that, and they'd say, "Well, I love to go hiking. I love to go exploring. I love to go, yachting. I love golf. I love photography. I love my family. I can't make a living doing that." And you're probably right. Right? You can't make a living. Maybe you can do a photography studio, but most of us probably that's not going to do it for us, right? But what we found is all of those passions, those interests you have, those things you love to do, it's not about trying to find a job necessarily doing that specific thing. What we found is all those passions or interests point to a set of career needs below that most of us don't even know are there. But once you know what those career needs are that are unique to you, you have a lot more flexibility to figure out how to get those career needs met. So we're going to go through a very little exercise for you to figure out what your career needs are. So bear with me, and we're going to go through a process, as they say in Canada, right? So I want you to do this. The first thing we're going to do and talk about is what you would do with unlimited time if money were not an issue. So you have in that first upper right, is it right? Yeah, left-hand quadrant that you've just created. I want you to take just a minute and write down, if you had 5 years to live, right, with good health. So 5 years from now, 2024, May 3rd, will be your last day on earth. But for the next 5 years, it's really good health. But 5 years is it. What would you do? Just write it down. What would you do with your time? So you've written down some things. I can tell you my list when I've done this is I'd build a house on an acreage, enjoy the process, and then leave it to my family. It's just the fact, building other people I've heard want to travel, backpack, get that degree, learn the piano, learn the violin, beyond some of the obvious stuff like spending time with your family and those your loved ones, whatever that discretionary stuff is very telling. It's interesting. It points to some stuff. We'll get to that in a second. The second one is on the right corner there. If you had unlimited wealth, okay, now you're going to live for another 45 years. So not terminating 5, it's 45. And you had unlimited wealth. Let's put a number on that. 140 million free and clear after the IRS and everyone else. You've got 145 million sitting in the bank, bearing interest or whatever you want, and a lot of years to live. How would you spend your time? What would you do? So thank you for doing that. I appreciate it. Now we're going to use this data here in a second, but what I want to introduce is an important concept to kind of getting to what you need in your career, and thus, how to shape it and think about it, hopefully, or at least inform it as you go forward. It's called the passionate core. The passionate core really is this concept of behind each one of those passions, those things that you felt were important to do, it's meeting a certain need that's unique to you. Every one of us have one or two kind of career needs that absolutely are critical. And when those needs are met, there's a one-to-one relationship. When those needs are met and you look back at your career, 30, 40 years, whatever it is, you will find when those needs are met, you're pretty engaged, very engaged. When those needs are partially met, you're partially engaged. When those needs aren't met, you're not engaged. I'll give you an example for myself. I have a huge need, and I didn't know this till I did this research and then did my own work, that I have a huge need for independence. I have a huge need to create things that are new. Real big need for me. And I found when I was in roles that allowed independence, autonomy, and to create things anew, I was very engaged. When I was in roles that didn't allow that, I was not engaged. My last role was the biggest role, very big title, young guy in that, and I hated it because those needs weren't being met. Those needs were absolutely not being met. I can't change myself. I can't change my wiring. Neither can you. So we got to identify what your needs are. So how do we do that? Well, on both of those lists that you just put down, you identify what would I do if I had 5 years, what I have to do if I have 45 years. There's some common things that are in both of those. Those are your common interests. Now, we're going to process those in a sec, but those common interests will tell you what your core, kind of point to what your core needs are, because each one of those common interests are meeting a need you have. I'll give you an example, and these are real examples of people identifying their core needs. First one up on the left hand, he realized that unlimited time to, unlimited wealth or limited time to live, those two questions, the common interests and needs and things that he loved were carpentry, writing, and painting. Now, he can't make a living doing that, he felt. He might have very well been right. But what he found is that the core need, what did that do for him personally, was create something that lasts. That's something that was a core need for him. And when that need was met, historically, he was very happy, very excited. And he was able to shape a role and really declare it in such a way that he was starting to get that need met in his work, and he became kind of that top 3%. This one, when he went through, he says he loved travel, long walks, mountain climbing. Again, you can't make a living doing those things. But what we found is what he needed was freedom. And that when he had a level of autonomy and freedom, when that need was met, he was very engaged. When it wasn't met, he wasn't engaged. Gardening, volunteer work, and mentoring was her set of needs, right? Sorry, passions, I should say. Was to nurture and grow things was her need. Fundamentally, they identified what is behind that. What does each one of those passions do for me personally? When they ask that question repeatedly, they come up with these core need answers. Those are the needs that need to be met for each of them. Each one of you has one or two or more of these needs, right? The question is, what are they, and do you know what they are? So as you look at that, and this is an exercise, because we only got a few minutes left, what I'd like you to do is maybe go to your partner and talk to your partner about kind of what you wrote down, and fundamentally, what are the common passions on each one of these lists? And what do each one of those passions do for you personally? What does this really tell you about what maybe your core needs are, all right? So if you can kind of have that conversation with your partner, if there's 5 at a table, pick one. You'll do, a trio. I'm going to give you a few minutes to have that conversation with your partner. I hate to stop it because you guys are, one thing I've always found is a winning strategy is have someone talk about themselves to someone else. That just works really well. So if I'm ever in trouble at home, that's what I have my wife just, it's all good. So hopefully you had a robust conversation, right? We're doing this very quickly. This is something that I would say you might want to, there's always crock pot time. As you think about, again, what are my passions? What does it do for me personally? What are my maybe perhaps core needs? You might have stumbled on a couple right now, hopefully did. If not, think about it. And go through the process. Ask yourself those questions and ask for each one, what does that do for me personally? Because that points to a core need you have that is just finding expression in your passions. Anyone want to share kind of what bubbled up for them in their conversation when it came to some of the core needs that they may have, or a core need you may have from a career standpoint? Yeah, yes, sir.
I've known I've kind of figured out some years back that I like to solve problems, I like to make changes, and I like to make an impact.
I like it. Yeah. Solve problems, make changes, make an impact.
Make good changes in a reasonable manner.
Yeah.
To be more clear, not just make any old change because I like to make a change.
Yeah. But if it's a maintenance role that doesn't allow you to solve problems, just follow the recipe, it's probably less interesting to you.
Interested in a real big hurry.
Yeah. It's good to know that, right? So you need to be enrolled, whatever you call it, it needs to be a problem-solving, impactful role where you're implementing reasonable change. Those are your core needs. That's what works for you. Thank you. Yeah, it's good to know that, whatever name you put on it.
I'm one of those guys who won't retire.
Well, yeah, you and everyone else. I won't retire because I got 5 kids and I can't, you know. There's Anyone else? Yes, sir.
Kathy kind of pointed out that I seem to be a risk taker. I put down as my number 2 on short-term gambling.
There it is. That's a different meeting, you know, to go to.
Number 1 on my long-term was buy a business of interest in myself.
Got it. So you really like more of an entrepreneurial tinge. You like high risk. You like the energy of it. You like that works better for you, and those needs need to be met. You had your hand up.
I first of all, I found it very interesting how the top 2 boxes sort of matched up, even though they had different titles at the top. The same pattern appeared in both of them.
Yep.
Kind of translated down to the 2 below, which is more focused on helping others.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Being
in an environment where I interacted with others.
Yeah. So having meaningful interaction and impact on others is your core need, and when that's met, good. If not, we're having a problem. Great insight. Absolutely. Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
Both boxes were the same, except for when I had $140 million, I also built a beach house. But it was about learning and helping others, and that's the big things.
Yeah, I find that as a common need is probably 30% of people get around to that learning piece. They just have a thirst for learning. I wish that was one of my core needs. I'd be proud of it, but it's not. Unfortunately, I like to learn, but some people that is just, if they're not challenged in, quote, learning with new variant, they really are not happy in their role. Yeah, it's interesting. Well, others want some level of constancy.
It's also the helping others. So being in a role that I could mentor people, teach them, that type of thing.
Yeah. Great for you to know that, actually. Thank you. Anyone else from a core need that you identified? Thank you for sharing. Again, I'd encourage you went through pretty quickly, but that's something you might want to spend some time on. Go through it again when you have a little more time. And the book kind of, again, we're giving it away, so I'm not trying to shuck books at you here, and sell books. But it gets a little bit more depth there as far as exploring and identifying your core needs and then what to do with it. Because that really fundamentally is where you go next, right?
You can do the assessment online too.
Yes, you can.
Share it with your family and your children, and even for me, going through this exercise first time a year ago, and it's kind of a nice thing to do on at least an annual basis to revalidate and see how it changed. And
Absolutely. Absolutely. I take it every about year. My wife takes it, and we touch base on what number is it and what do we need to do, what's not being met as far as what we know about our needs to be excited and engaged in our career. I actually had a seminal moment. My oldest daughter's 22, and she's an opera singer, and I have a 21-year-old daughter too, and so I had them take it for the second time and get some aha experiences just last week. It was kind of cool. So I think you're absolutely right. It's a nice pulse check. We will send you the website where it is for you to complete it for free, and it's done online and tabulates for you real easy and that sort of thing. So thank you for that. Then, of course, it's fundamentally what role meets those needs. That's the work. Describe and choose a perfect role, and then you declare it. What we've found is at the end of the day, if you find yourself in the organization, people will mobilize and organize around those people. They're very clear on what they want to do. You got to marry it, obviously, with the needs of the organization. But I have story after story, a lot of which we share in the book, of people who have really really reoriented their career and been very successful in whatever organization they choose to be in because they followed kind of the principles of identifying the core needs, declaring it, and aligning it up with the needs of the organization. Finally, it's these career navigation. I don't have time to talk about them today. They're in the book. But shaping your role, being the players, love that chapter. I actually assign that to executives all the time. As far as how do you really have a set of tactics and skills for influencing key players or people in your organization. And I think that's a really nice methodology. For that alone, I'd say kind of read the book, or at least that chapter. Just how do you influence people to get your needs met and the organization's needs met? Get equipped, network, know the road rules, the culture you're in, and then fundamentally check in. So those are the 6 kind of practices once you've identified your core needs to actually bring it into the external world. I think my time's up. So here's the contact information. I am flattered when people reach out to me. I know Kathy is too. If there's anything we can do, obviously we're a professional services firm, so we're always trying to do more work, but we're not here to just do work. I actually really am flattered if people just want to use this as a sounding board, or if there's any kind of thing we can help you with, resource you around, glad to do it in this career talent space. So please use us. That's the contact info. And with that, any questions? All right, I think we're done. Thank you so much.